This lesson is Mobile Design and Layout. In this lesson, you'll learn the basics of the new Fluid Grid Layout feature in Dreamweaver CS6. Specifically, you'll be looking at the mobile, tablet, and desktop layouts that are created by default, and then you'll begin learning how to modify them into rows and columns that are optimized for different size screens. So to begin with, you'll need to define the DW15 Lessons folder as a site in Dreamweaver. Once you've defined this folder as a site, you'll see there's two subfolders, Fluid Grid and Media Queries. You'll want to expand the Fluid Grid folder and double-click Intro Content.html and Secondary Content.html. A bit later on, you'll be copying and pasting the content in these pages into two Fluid Grid layout divs that you'll be creating. But before you do that, obviously, we have to talk about what Fluid Grid layout divs are. So let's choose File, New Fluid Grid Layout. So this is a new feature in Dreamweaver CS6, and this feature is designed to create layouts that are optimized for different size screens. So you can see on the screen that there are three representations of a mobile, tablet, and a desktop view. Additionally, each of these has a number in the middle, 5, 8, and 10. So these represent the number of columns that you can begin to align content to. Now the technology that allows you to do this is a combination of HTML5 and CSS3. So you'll be talking about some of the supporting files that are created to do this. But for now, keep in mind that you'll be creating a style sheet that sends different styles to different size screens. So the other pieces here, these percentages at the bottom, 91%, 93%, and 90%, these represent the page width. In other words, you might want a little bit of space between these columns and the rest of your page, and that's what these numbers equal. Now, keep in mind, if you're more advanced, if you've used Fluid Grid layouts or a grid structure and media queries before, you can change the number of columns here to suit your needs. But for now, let's just click Create. You'll be asked to save a style sheet. Let's go ahead and rename this base.css and click Save. And what you'll see here is the default view of a Fluid Grid layout. Let's immediately choose File, Save. And let's rename this index.html and click Save. Now I mentioned earlier that there are some supporting files that are created with Fluid Grid layouts, and here you can see what's happening. Dreamweaver is asking you to save these two files, boilerplate.css and respond.js. So again, the default page type for this is HTML5, and boilerplate CSS includes a number of styles that make sure that this HTML5 document works well in all browsers. And then the respond JavaScript, I'm not going to get too much into the details here, but this has to do with the images that you'll be adding to the page and some other technical features. If you want to learn more about what those documents do, you can look in the book and we'll talk a little bit more about them there. So let's click Copy for now. And I want to point out these three icons on the very bottom of the screen here. So currently we're inside the mobile size or the mobile view of this Fluid Grid layout. Go ahead and click on the second icon, which is the tablet size. And notice that we now expand to the 8 columns that I mentioned earlier. Also notice that this default Fluid Grid layout div at the very top has also expanded to the total width of those 8 columns. Same thing here, if I click on the third icon, which is the desktop size, we now get a 10 column layout, and that Fluid Grid layout div also expands. So let's go back to the mobile size layout, because this is a key part of understanding Fluid Grid layouts. The concept here is that if you're designing a Fluid Grid layout from scratch, you want to start with the mobile. It's a mobile first philosophy. And what we're going to do here is create a very basic single column layout, and then when we go to the next view, and in this video we're only going to do the tablet view, we'll turn that into a 2 column layout. But first, let's just add the basic Fluid Grid divs. So what I'd like you to do is click on the edge of that first default div. When you click on that, you'll now add a second one, and it will appear immediately below the first one. So to add the second, make sure that the Insert panel is open, And additionally, make sure that you're inside the layout section. And then locate this object, Insert Fluid Grid Layout div tag. Go ahead and click once, and you'll be asked to name it. Go ahead and call that Intro Content. Notice there's a checkbox that says Start New Row. You want to make sure that that is checked right now, and then click OK. What you'll see is you get a new box appear right below. And what we're now going to do is add the second one immediately below this one. So again, let's click on the edge of that intro content to select it and choose Insert Fluid Grid Layout div tag one more time. And let's type secondary content. And then click OK. So before we go too much further, I just want to point out the effect this has on the other layouts. Again, if you click on that second tablet size, you'll see them all stretch. If you click on the third, they all stretch. Now, however, let's go back to the tablet size. What we're going to do is we're going to turn this into a basic 2-column layout, and then we'll add the content a little bit later. So in the tablet view, you need to click on that second div, the intro content one, and notice when you click on the edge here, you get these small anchor points. Now you want to be a little careful. These 3 anchor points, we want to choose the one in the middle, and then click and drag to the left, and we're going to be changing the width. Notice as you're dragging that the number of columns that you're currently located on appears, as well as the width in percentage. So what this tells you is that these fluid grid layouts snap to these columns. So this is a large part of the grid philosophy. When you are forced to snap fluid grid layouts to columns, that helps your content become aligned by default. So keep on dragging, and we want to make sure that we turn this into a 3-column fluid grid layout div. And now we're going to take the secondary content and we're going to move that up 1 row so that it's right next to the first one. So this can be a little tricky because what we're going to do is we're going to try to move it up a row first, and you'll see that it won't work. So let me just point this out. Click on the edge of the secondary content div. Notice there's an arrow on the right-hand side of that div. That's called Move Up a Row. If you try to click on it, nothing will happen. If you think about it, it shouldn't move up a row yet because this div is wider than the space it can fit into. So essentially, we need to make the width of this at least 5 columns wide, and most likely more narrow so that it will fit. So, like you did before, click on the edge of that fluid grid layout and begin to click and drag to the left. So we know that we have to be at least 5, if not less. Let's actually go down to 3, then let go. So when you let go, it's going to move up to that row because we told it to move up to that row. And if you want to shift this or move it, then you could do that by clicking on the left side. So place your cursor on the left-hand side of that div. Click to the right, I should say click and drag to the right, and you'll notice how you can move it or shift it. So again, this left-hand side allows you to shift the element, and the right-hand side allows you to extend the width. So this is a little tricky to get used to at first, but once you realize how it works, it's fairly straightforward. So what you've just done here is you've actually created a 2-column layout. And the point I really want to stress here is that this layout right now is only being implemented in the tablet view or the tablet style. Click back on your mobile, and that's the original one that you created. Of course, your tablet is the 2-column, but this third one, the desktop size, is still the single column. And this is the part that throws a lot of people off. So really, you have to create styles individually, or I should say layout styles individually for each of these. But let's just focus on the tablet just for a second. Click back on tablet and let's add that content to these div elements. So first, let's select the text in the very top section. We would call that our header. And you would delete that, open up the images folder, And let's click and drag to add the oulogo.png file into that header. Go ahead and call this logo and click OK. That adds that graphic. If you remember, we opened those HTML files earlier at the beginning of the lesson. Let's open those now. So go to introcontent.html, select all, and copy. Go back to index.html, select the placeholder text, paste, and then do the same thing for secondary content. Open it, select all, copy, go back to index.html, select all the content, and paste. Now, while we're in here, let's also add an image to the celebrating vegetables, or I should say underneath the celebrating vegetables heading. So click once under that heading, go to your images folder, and locate the beets fluid JPEG, and then drag and drop that underneath the header. Type the word beets in the alternate text field and click OK. Let's go ahead and choose File, Save All. And we could go much further with these layouts, obviously. And remember, we're just doing the tablet layout here. But what I want to show you is how this looks within the browser. So let's go ahead and preview this in the browser. And you'll see that depending on your default screen, remember we're in the desktop view by default here. So this desktop view was still single column. As we begin to click and drag the width of this browser, at a certain point when we hit 768, which is right about here, it flips. It changes. It uses the media query and we get that second column. Now, one thing I also want to point out here, it's a little tricky to see, but when I'm changing the width of that browser, this image here is actually changing width and height. It's actually scaling. So that's part of the benefits of getting this fluid grid layout. It's a responsive design. Something that's built in is very cool. Keep on going, however, and we'll move to that single column layout eventually. So what you've just seen here is the basics of the fluid grid layouts, in which you create layouts for mobile, tablet, and desktop. But that's it for now. This lesson has been Mobile Design and Layout in Dreamweaver CS6.